Back in 2019, I made my first video about a game called Vigor, an extraction shooter set in the 90s post-apocalyptic Norway for a change of scene. It oozed atmosphere and had fun twists on the extraction shooter genre. I actually liked it a lot, but it was also a console exclusive, which meant I probably wasn't going to be playing it too much. But even back then, it seemed like an obvious choice for the PC market, and I was always confused as to why that never seemed to be part of the game's plan. That is, until now. Vigor has just launched on PC, and I've been excited to jump in and see how PC Vigor plays. Now, if you're not familiar with Vigor, it's a fairly traditional extraction shooter, but with some interesting rules. Players join a map, they hunt, loot, kill each other, and extract with that loot. However, after some time, each round will get overtaken by radiation winds, and you'll be forced to extract from the map, usually in a specific direction, and this can force players to funnel out near each other, creating an almost battle royale-like endgame. Now, between rounds, you can also build up a player-owned shelter that's in a safe zone, and this shelter can provide you with bonuses which will help you gear up for the next mission. It's sort of an enhanced element to player progression, allowing you to enhance your base progression, which will in turn provide for you. So what's changed with the game since its launch? How does it fare on PC? Well, first, let's talk about the price. On console, Vigor is a free-to-play game funded by microtransactions and whatnot. On PC, at least for the early access version of the game, it is $20. And as you can imagine, that's not really going over so well with fans. Now, you're technically buying the reinforcements pack that will give you a bunch of extra gear to play with, and it gives you access to the early access version of the game. So they're sort of pretending like they're selling you extra cosmetics for the $20 as opposed to access to the game, but not a lot of people see it that way. And once early access has concluded, it'll then go free to play. But considering that most of the reviews are really harping on it being paid, this could really hurt the game's long-term survivability. Also, early access is missing some pretty important features, like the in-game party system, so you won't be able to team up with friends to play in team deathmatch mode, play duos, trios in the extraction mode. That's obviously a huge blow to the fun factor of the game, since extraction shooters are often the most fun when you play with friends. There also doesn't appear to be any cross-play or cross-progression with the console players, and I'm not sure if that's in the works down the road, but I couldn't figure out how to log in with my console version account to try and transfer items and progress to the PC version. Alright, it's not all bad news. In fact, it's actually a pretty solid port of the next-gen console version of the game. On my PC, I was easily running at over 120 FPS on epic settings. On more mid-range PCs, I'd expect you to be able to easily get over 60 FPS, so the game is nicely optimized, and I guess it would have to be, since it did actually run on last-gen consoles. Unfortunately, there's no upscaling like DLSS or FSR, frame generation, low latency modes, but I doubt you'll need them for the short term, and maybe they're coming in the long term. It's still a massive improvement over playing on the console version. When it first launched, this game was locked to 30 FPS, and then they released it on the next gen consoles, but it was still capped at 60, so being able to play at 4K, well over 100 FPS, really just feels like you're being allowed to enjoy the game at a higher fidelity with no penalty. Now, the unique vibe of this game being set in a post-apocalyptic Norway with its rural maps makes Vigor really stand out from the gritty extraction shooters it's competing with. But don't let that fool you into thinking that this game is an easy win or something like that. The moment-to-moment gameplay is laser-focused on encouraging PvP, and it really gets the heart racing when you start to hear gunfire nearby, but you can't spot the shooter. Vigor is a good game, and it was when it first launched on console, and I would have played it a lot more had it been on PC. Just 30 FPS lock on console wasn't enough to get me to hop on over to it, unfortunately. But if you play on both platforms regularly and you've played Vigor before, then you'll almost certainly enjoy it on PC. And for people who have never played Vigor before, it's still a pretty easy recommendation on PC at this point, especially once it goes actually free to play. Now, as for how the devs have translated Vigor's gameplay to PC, well, that's where things could use a bit of improvement. For the PC port, devs said that they rebalanced all the weapons to fit PC, and for the most part, they do feel snappy and accurate compared to their performance on console. But there's still some weird legacy stuff left over. The crosshairs for guns get really wide when you go full auto, but it doesn't seem like you're actually getting that accurate. As long as your crosshair is centered on your target, you're probably going to hit them. So the UI divergence from the actual gameplay is quite annoying at times. Also, because this is a third-person game, players can track each other from behind cover and get lots of very frustrating angles against each other. And while that's not usually a huge issue on controller because everyone is tracking their targets with a little bit less of an accurate input device, on PC everyone can dial in on you even before exposing themselves and just absolutely waste you before you even have time to respond. I also died a couple times to players that looked like they were totally behind cover, even though they could still shoot at me, which was also frustrating. As far as third-person shooters go on PC, I think they need a little bit more fine-tuning to make them feel more enjoyable. I also found the long-range combat a little bit frustrating. The magnified optics are great for spotting targets, but if you have a suppressed rifle, you don't get any visible tracers, and the glare on the scope optic generally makes it very hard to spot your bullet impacts on the terrain. So basically, trying to dial in your shots is almost impossible. Unless you're already intimately familiar with the game's bullet physics, it's not a particularly intuitive system. Now, when playing this game on console, it was pretty important to ADS at range since it was just really hard to be accurate at a controller while hip firing. But with a mouse, ADSing feels a bit more optional. If anything, using a weapon in first person just makes you feel a bit more vulnerable because of the reduced field of view, and third person shooting feels pretty darn accurate. Sniper rifles and marksman rifles would be the exception, as you don't get an aiming reticle unless you actually ADS with them. Now, something that I think the devs have gotten away with for a while, even on console, is the third-person character animations while you're aiming. When you get shot, your character will flinch and point their gun upward to the sky. But despite that visual feedback, your shots will still hit where your crosshair is pointed. So seeing your gun fire while pointed up and having your shots land on target is extremely distracting and just doesn't feel appropriate for a game that's trying to take itself a bit more seriously. Obviously not a massive issue, but certainly something the devs should look into fixing. Now, I'm going to give Vigor a little bit of a pass here because it is technically an early access game, so I hope they actually are treating it as an early access title and looking for critical feedback and wanting to make changes to it, but it does feel a bit like playing a console game with mouse and keyboard. Shooting in third person just feels a bit too accurate, and sustained automatic fire doesn't have enough penalty to compensate. Likewise, aiming down sight should be emphasized more, but because you're so accurate in third person, it's really more of a risk to ADS. The inventory system and general UI also feel pretty much identical to the console versions. You actually don't really need to manage inventory slots that much in Vigor since everything automatically stacks and is then sorted into individual slots, but performing vital actions like healing or equipping armor plates is still done exclusively via a consumable wheel. You have to hold E to open the wheel, mouse over the item you want, then let go of E and left click to use the item. And actually selecting the item you want is tricky as the selection radius is temperamental, so it's easy to select the wrong item. It's also super unintuitive to let go of the consumable wheel button to select it rather than just left clicking when the item is highlighted. I definitely shot my gun multiple times just trying to select an item. Now, I do want to give the devs credit for this port being pretty well optimized as far as I can tell. However, the graphics haven't really taken advantage of any of that extra PC horsepower. And there's tons of things like terrain and shadow pop in while playing that's super distracting, especially in a game where you're constantly needing to scan the distance for movement. Having all of that pop in is constantly distracting. Now, when I covered Vigor last time, I said it was the benchmark other extraction shooters should be judged by. And while I'll definitely stand by that statement from 4-ish years ago, a lot has changed in the extraction shooter landscape. We now have Arena Breakout Infinite that's kind of the accessible extraction shooter, and it has tons of quality of life improvements to experience. Gray Zone Warfare, which again just came out, has a cool persistent map that makes playing with friends and dying something that just doesn't derail the play session anymore. And then of course there's Hunt Showdown, Tarkov, and a giant list of other extraction shooters that Vigor has to compete against, and it's gonna be tricky for them unless they really dial in the PC experience. And also because the game is designed as a free-to-play at its core, it means it has some quirks that further undermine some of the stakes of the gameplay. You get daily login rewards that dole out good weapons and consumables. You can buy insurance that guarantees your entire loadout is saved if if you die, and it's pretty cheap, so you kind of always buy it. Vigor has gone from being an extraction shooter in a console market that didn't have as much extraction shooter competition to a PC market where the competition is crazy. They're now a little fish in a big pond, and I think they're going to have to really look at what their competition is offering and make a few updates and changes to the overall package. Now, all that said, I am still happy to see Vigor on PC, and it was fun being able to experience the game with mouse and keyboard for the first time. If you ever played Vigor on console and enjoyed that experience, everything about it, for better or worse, is replicated in the PC version. And despite my criticisms, I do think Vigor has finally arrived on the platform that it's best suited for, and I do hope that the devs can make some good changes throughout this early access period. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about Vigor. Have you played it a bunch on console? Do you like some of the unique qualities and characteristics of it? I personally really gravitated towards the atmospherics, the ambiance, and even the shelter crafting in the game I enjoyed a lot. I'd be curious to hear your opinions in the comments. Let me know. And up next, check out this video on Arena Breakout Infinite, a game competing directly with Vigor that's actually pretty competent for what it is. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.